In a galaxy where warriors are bred in labs and legends are forged in fire, humanity was never taken seriously. Our stories were laughed at, tales of firefighters charging into infernos, teachers shielding children from bullets, strangers running toward danger instead of away from it. To them we were naive, soft, dreamers clinging to fairy tales of courage. But they never understood that our heroes aren't born in blood-soaked arenas. They're forged in silence, in suffering, in choice. This is the story of Marcus Chen, a man without armor, without superhuman strength, without prophecy, just a man who walked alone into the jaws of death because no one else would. And in that moment, the galaxy stopped laughing and started listening. The mockery. The victory celebration in Nexus Prime's main hall buzzed with the voices of 4 different species, each speaking in their native tongues, while universal translators worked overtime. The joint military exercise had concluded successfully, and representatives from the Galactic Defense Alliance were unwinding after 3 intense weeks of combat training. Marcus Chen sat at the edge of the human contingent, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. At 45, the graying veteran had seen enough battles to know when to speak and when to listen. His weathered hands bore scars from conflicts across 3 star systems, and his dark eyes held the weight of memories that followed him everywhere. Tonight, he was content to watch the celebration unfold around him. High Commander Zethkari dominated the center of attention, his towering Kalani frame easily visible above the crowd. The reptilian warrior's scales shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that indicated pride and satisfaction. His people had evolved on a high-gravity world where only the strongest survived, and it showed in every line of his muscular body. "The Battle of Kethmore," Zethkari announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "My ancestor, War Chief Malethkari, faced 10,000 enemy warriors with only his personal guard of 50. They held the Iao mountain pass for 7 days without food or water." The assembled aliens listened with respectful attention. Battlemaster Vexthar of the Groven clicked his mandibles in approval, his insectoid features displaying what passed for admiration among his people. The Groven had evolved from predatory insects, and their natural armor and enhanced reflexes made them formidable fighters. "Impressive," Vexthar acknowledged, his translator converting his chittering speech into standard Galactic. "Though my people have similar tales. The Hive Wars of the Third Era saw Battle Queen Zexith defend the Great Colony against a 1,000,000-strong swarm of void spawn. She fought for 13 straight days, her natural armor deflecting their acid weapons while her speed allowed her to strike faster than their enhanced nervous systems could react." Admiral Sirana of the Aquari delegation rippled her fin-like appendages in what her species used as applause. Her blue-green skin glistened under the hall's artificial lighting, and the gill slits along her neck fluttered with excitement. The Aquari were equally comfortable in water or air, and their homeworld's vast oceans had produced warriors capable of fighting in 3 dimensions. "Both admirable," Sirana said, her voice carrying the musical quality of her aquatic people. "But consider the siege of the Coral Fortress. Admiral Merthalis led the defense underwater for 6 months, fighting enemies who could not match our natural advantages in the deep. When surface dwellers tried to drain the ocean above us, we simply moved the battle deeper, where pressure alone would crush their vessels." The alien commanders continued sharing tales of legendary warriors and impossible victories, each story grander than the last. They spoke of natural advantages, superior evolution, and the tactical brilliance of their greatest military minds. The human contingent listened politely, but Marcus noticed the subtle dismissal in their alien colleagues' voices when they mentioned humanity's contributions to the Alliance. Captain Elena Vasquez, a young officer with fierce determination in her brown eyes, shifted uncomfortably beside him. At 28, she represented the new generation of human military leadership, trained from childhood for interspecies cooperation. Her family had been career military for 3 generations, and she took pride in human achievements. "What about Earth's heroes?" she asked during a lull in the alien stories. "We have our own legends of incredible courage and sacrifice. High Commander Zethkari's head turned toward her with predatory interest. His yellow eyes, designed for hunting prey on his homeworld, fixed on the young captain with what might have been amusement. "Ah, yes," he said, his translator adding a note of condescension to his words. "Human mythology. Please enlighten us with tales of your warriors." The way he said warriors made it clear he considered the term generous when applied to humans. Elena's face flushed, but she pressed on. "The heroes of September 11th, she began. "When terrorists attacked our cities, ordinary people became extraordinary. Firefighters ran into burning towers when everyone else was running out. They climbed dozens of floors carrying heavy equipment, knowing the buildings might collapse at any moment. Battlemaster Vexithar's mandibles clicked in, what sounded like amusement. Your species lacks natural armor or enhanced strength. Surely trained emergency responders following protocol hardly qualifies as legendary heroism." "They weren't just following protocol," Elena insisted. "They knew they might die, but they went anyway because people needed help. Over 300 firefighters died that day, but they saved thousands of lives." Admiral Cyrana's fins rippled skeptically. "Tragic, certainly, but any trained rescue force would respond to emergencies. This is basic social organization, not mythical heroism." Sergeant Tom Bradley, a compact man with explosive expertise and a quick temper, leaned forward from his position near the bar. His hands, stained permanently by years of handling ordnance, clenched around his drink. "What about the teachers at Sandy Hook?" he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "When a gunman entered an elementary school, the teachers threw themselves between the shooter and their students. Victoria Soto hid her first graders in cabinets and closets, then told the gunman they were in the gym. He shot her, but every one of her students survived. The aliens exchanged glances that clearly conveyed their skepticism. Zethkari's scales shifted to patterns indicating mild amusement mixed with pity. "Again, tragic," he said, "but hardly supernatural. Any adult would protect young ones. This is basic biological programming, not evidence of exceptional warrior capability." Marcus had remained silent throughout the exchange, but something in the alien's dismissive tone finally stirred him to speak. He set down his cold coffee and stood slowly, his movements carrying the careful precision of someone who had learned to conserve energy for when it mattered most. "You want to hear about human warriors?" he asked quietly. His voice carried just enough to be heard over the celebration, but its tone made the nearby groups stop their conversations and turn toward him. Zethkari's predatory attention focused on the older human with renewed interest. "Please share your people's legends." Marcus looked around the room, taking in the faces of his alien colleagues. He saw skepticism, condescension, and barely concealed amusement. They viewed humans as useful allies, certainly, but not as natural warriors. Humanity's contributions to the Alliance were technological and organizational, not martial. "Audie Murphy," Marcus began. 20 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighed 110 pounds. German forces attacked his position with 6 tanks and 250 soldiers. His squad was dead or wounded. He climbed onto a burning tank destroyer that could explode at any moment and used its machine gun to hold off the entire force, for an hour. When he ran out of ammunition, he organized a counterattack with the survivors and drove off the enemy. Vexthar's mandibles clicked dismissively. Exaggeration through repeated telling. No single warrior could face such odds and survive. "We told Pilecki," Marcus continued, ignoring the interruption. "He voluntarily got himself arrested and sent to Auschwitz concentration camp to organize resistance from inside and gather intelligence about what was happening there. He spent 2.5 years in one of the most horrific places humans ever created, not because he was forced to, but because someone needed to bear witness." "Impressive dedication," Cyrana acknowledged, "but not really combat prowess." Marcus's eyes grew distant, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of personal experience. Hugh Thompson, Jr. He was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam who saw American soldiers killing civilians in a village. He landed his helicopter between the soldiers and the remaining civilians, ordered his crew to point their guns at his own countrymen, and refused to leave until the killing stopped. Then he flew the survivors to safety. The room had grown quieter now, other conversations fading as more beings turned to listen. The alien commanders maintained their skeptical expressions, but something in Marcus's tone suggested these weren't just stories to him. That demonstrates moral courage, Zethkari conceded. But these isolated incidents hardly represent your species as a whole. Every civilization has individuals who exceed normal parameters. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. 13,000 poorly armed civilians held off the German army for nearly a month. They knew they couldn't win. They knew they would all die. They fought anyway because dying on their feet was better than dying on their knees. Desperate people cornered by superior forces, Vexthar observed. Basic survival instinct. Marcus shook his head slowly. Rick Riscorla, head of security for Morgan Stanley in the South Tower on 9/11. When the first plane hit the North Tower, he immediately started evacuating his company's 2,700 employees, even though authorities said his building was safe. He'd served in Vietnam and knew what real danger felt like. He spent an hour going floor by floor singing songs to keep people calm, making sure everyone got out. He was last seen going back up the stairs to check for stragglers when the tower collapsed. The alien commanders exchanged looks. These stories were beginning to follow a pattern that made them uncomfortable. Stanislav Petrov, Marcus continued, Soviet radar operator who probably saved your worlds from nuclear war before humanity ever reached the stars. His computer showed incoming American missiles, and protocol demanded he report an attack immediately. Instead, he decided the readings were false and refused to report them. He was right. If he'd followed orders, both superpowers would have launched everything they had. Admiral Cyrana's fins had stopped rippling. One individual making a decision hardly represents warrior culture. You're missing the point, Marcus said quietly. These aren't stories about super soldiers or genetically enhanced warriors. They're about ordinary people who chose to do extraordinary things when the moment demanded it. A teacher who died protecting children, a pilot who stood up to his own military, a security guard who trusted his instincts over authority, an operator who chose to think instead of just follow orders. Zethkari's scales had shifted to patterns indicating confusion and growing unease. But humans lack natural advantages. Your species is fragile, your reflexes are slow, your strength is minimal compared to most spacefaring races. That's exactly the point, Marcus replied. We're not stronger or faster or tougher than you. But when everything goes wrong, when the odds are impossible, when any rational being would give up, humans have this strange habit of deciding that someone has to try anyway. The celebration around them had grown noticeably quieter as more beings stopped to listen. The alien commanders were beginning to realize they were hearing something they hadn't expected, something that challenged their assumptions about their human allies. These are just stories, Vexthar insisted, but his clicking mandibles betrayed uncertainty. Legends your people tell to compensate for physical limitations. Marcus was about to respond when the hall's emergency lighting activated, bathing everything in red. The celebration stopped instantly as emergency klaxons began blaring throughout the station. Every being in the room automatically shifted into alert postures as training took over. All senior staff to command immediately, came the announcement, over the station's communication system. Priority Alpha situation, this is not a drill. The alien commanders immediately began moving toward the exits, their earlier conversation forgotten in the face of real crisis. Marcus followed, but not before noticing that Captain Vasquez and Sergeant Bradley were watching him with new expressions. They had served with him for 2 years, but they were beginning to realize they might not know their veteran colleague as well as they thought. As they rushed through the corridors toward the command center, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his alien colleagues were about to discover the difference between human stories and human reality. The emergency klaxons continued to wail, and somewhere in the back of his mind, old instincts were beginning to stir. The ghosts he carried were about to become very real indeed. The test. The command center of Nexus Prime buzzed with controlled chaos as officers from 4 different species worked at holographic displays showing tactical data, emergency communications, and real-time sensor feeds. The massive main screen dominated one wall, currently displaying a three-dimensional map of the Kepler research station, located 3 hours away at maximum jump speed. Station Commander Threxnell, a veteran Kalani officer whose scales bore the scars of decades of service, called for attention as the senior staff assembled. His yellow eyes swept across the mixed group of alien and human officers, settling briefly on each face with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. Kepler Research Station has been seized by the extremist faction known as the Iron Liberation Front, Threxnell announced, his translator adding appropriate urgency to his naturally commanding voice. They have taken approximately 320 civilian researchers and support staff as hostages. The main screen shifted to show intelligence files on the terrorist organization. Images of their previous attacks scrolled past, each one demonstrating their willingness to kill civilians to advance their anti-government agenda. Their leader, a fanatical human named Director Kane, appeared on screen with his followers, all heavily armed with military-grade weapons. The terrorists are demanding the release of their imprisoned leadership and safe passage to the Outer Rim territories, Threxnell continued. They have given us 18 hours to comply, after which they will begin executing hostages. However, our primary concern is not their deadline. The display changed to show technical readouts from the research station. Warning indicators flashed, red across multiple systems, and damage assessments painted a grim picture of the facility's condition. During their initial assault, the terrorists damaged the station's primary life support systems, Threxnell explained. Atmospheric processors are operating at 30% capacity and continuing to degrade. At current failure rates, the Wuchi station will become uninhabitable in approximately 14 hours, well before their stated deadline. High Commander Zethkari stepped forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the tactical displays. His scales had shifted to patterns indicating aggressive determination, and his predatory instincts were clearly engaged. A direct assault, he declared with the confidence of a natural-born warrior. My Kalani shock troops can breach their defenses and neutralize the terrorists before they can harm the civilians. Battlemaster Vexthar's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed the tactical data. His compound eyes were designed for tracking multiple targets simultaneously, and his analysis was characteristically swift and efficient. Negative, he responded, with insectoid precision. The station's layout favors defenders. The terrorists have established overlapping fields of fire at key choke points. Groven assault protocols indicate a 73% probability of unacceptable civilian casualties. Admiral Sirana's fins rippled as she studied the station schematics from her aquatic perspective. Her people were masters of three-dimensional warfare, but the research station's environment posed unique challenges for her tactical doctrine. Underwater approach vectors are impossible, she observed, her musical voice carrying frustration. The station is completely enclosed, with no direct water access. Aquari forces cannot utilize our natural advantages in this environment, Marcus. Chen had remained silent during the initial briefing, studying the displays with the methodical attention of someone who had learned to look for details others might miss. His weathered hands traced patterns on the tactical interface as he absorbed the information about the station's layout, the terrorists' positions, and the failing life support systems. Captain Vasquez noticed his concentration and moved closer to him. "What do you think, Sergeant Chen?" she asked quietly, using his old rank from their previous deployments together. Marcus continued studying the data for several more seconds before responding. "It's a maze," he said finally. "Narrow corridors, multiple levels, limited access points. The terrorists know the layout better than we do, and they've had time to prepare their defenses." Threxnell had been monitoring various rescue scenarios on his command displays, each simulation ending in failure. His scales darkened with frustration as option after option proved unworkable. All conventional assault plans result in heavy civilian casualties, he announced to the assembled officers. The terrorists' defensive positions are too strong, and the station's compromised life support means we cannot afford a prolonged engagement. Zethkari's yellow eyes narrowed with predatory intensity. "Then we modify our approach. A coordinated multi-species assault, utilizing each of our natural advantages simultaneously." "To what end?" Vexthar demanded, his mandibles clicking with Agitation. The terrorists hold all the tactical advantages. They control the interior spaces. They know the station layout intimately, and they have prepared defensive positions specifically designed to counter our capabilities. The command center fell into tense silence as the reality of the situation settled over everyone present. The most elite warriors from 4 different species with all their natural advantages and superior technology were being stymied by a group of fanatical humans holed up in a research station. Admiral Sirana's fins had stopped their constant movement, indicating deep thought among her people. Perhaps negotiation remains our best option, she suggested reluctantly. Agree to their demands and hope they honor the agreement. The Iron Liberation Front has never honored a negotiated settlement, Threxnell replied grimly. Their psychological profiles indicate they view this as a final stand. They intend to die here, and they plan to take as many civilians with them as possible. Marcus stepped forward from his position near the back of the group. His movement was quiet and deliberate, but something in his posture caused the alien commanders to turn toward him with questioning expressions. "I'll go," he said simply. The statement hung in the air for several seconds as the assembled officers processed what they had heard. Sethkari's scales shifted to patterns indicating confusion, mixed with what might have been concern. "Sergeant Chen," he said carefully, "this is not a situation that can be resolved by individual action. The tactical requirements exceed any single being's capabilities." Marcus moved closer to the tactical displays, his eyes tracing the station's layout with the practiced gaze of someone who had navigated similar environments before. His scarred hands indicated specific choke points and defensive positions as he spoke. 320 people, he said quietly. 14 hours of air left. No time for extended planning or complex operations. Vexthar's compound eyes focused on the human with insectoid intensity. The mathematics are clear. 87 confirmed terrorists with military-grade weapons, fortified positions, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. One individual, regardless of species, cannot overcome such odds. The odds were impossible for Audie Murphy, too, Marcus replied, his voice carrying echoes of their earlier conversation. And for Rick Riscorla, and for the Warsaw fighters, and for everyone else I told you about. The alien commanders exchanged looks that clearly communicated their shared concern. They had just finished dismissing human mythology as compensatory fiction, and now one of those mythical humans was volunteering for what appeared to be a suicide mission. Captain Vasquez stepped forward, her young face tight with worry and determination. "Sir, if you're going, I'm going with you. And Bradley and at least a full squad of our best people." Marcus shook his head slowly, his attention still focused on the tactical displays. "No. More people just means more targets, more complications, more chances for something to go wrong. This needs to be simple." Sergeant Bradley had been uncharacteristically quiet since the briefing began, but now he moved closer to join the conversation. His hands, permanently stained from years of handling explosives, clenched and unclenched as he studied the station's schematics. "Marcus," he said, using the older man's first name for the first time in their 2-year partnership. "This isn't like the old days. These aren't insurgents with improvised weapons. They've got military hardware, prepared positions, and every advantage except time. Time is exactly what those civilians don't have," Marcus replied. He pointed to the life support readouts, which continued their steady decline toward total failure. "Every minute we spend planning is a minute less air for 320 innocent people." Threxnell had been listening to the exchange with growing unease. His experience as a station commander had taught him to recognize when personnel were volunteering for missions that exceeded reasonable survival parameters. "Sergeant Chen," he said formally, "I cannot authorize a solo infiltration mission with such minimal chances of success. The loss of experienced personnel serves no tactical purpose if the primary objective cannot be achieved." Marcus turned away from the displays to face the alien commander directly. His dark eyes held the weight of too many difficult decisions, too many impossible situations that had somehow been resolved through sheer determination rather than logical planning. "Commander," he said quietly, "what's the current survival rate for the hostages if we do nothing?" Threxenol's scales darkened as he consulted his calculations. Life support failure will kill everyone aboard the station in approximately 13 hours and 47 minutes. And if we attempt conventional rescue operations? Casualty projections indicate 60 to 80% civilian losses, with high probability of total mission failure. Marcus nodded slowly. So we're looking at certain death versus probable death, with a small chance of success thrown in, if someone gets lucky. Admiral Sairana's fins began rippling with agitation. Sergeant, you are describing your proposed mission as dependent on luck rather than tactical planning. This is not how military operations achieve successful outcomes. Military operations work when you have advantages, Marcus replied. Superior numbers, better equipment, favorable terrain, element of surprise. We don't have any of those things. What we have is 320 people who are going to die if somebody doesn't try something different. The command center had grown quiet except for the soft hum of electronics and the occasional alert chime from monitoring systems. Every being present understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented. A member of what they considered the weakest warrior species in the Alliance, volunteering for a mission that their strongest fighters had deemed impossible. Zeth Kari stepped closer to Marcus, his towering frame casting the human in shadow. His predatory instincts were clearly engaged, but they were focused on understanding rather than intimidation. Human, he said slowly, his translator adding notes of confusion and growing respect. Your species lacks our natural armor, our enhanced strength, our superior reflexes. What do you possess that makes you believe you can succeed where we cannot? Marcus looked up at the alien warrior, and for a moment the mask of quiet professionalism slipped away. Behind his calm exterior, the alien commanders caught a glimpse of something that made them step back instinctively. It wasn't anger or aggression or even determination. It was something far more unsettling. Absolute, unshakable certainty that he would find a way to complete his mission regardless of the cost. I don't know if I can succeed, Marcus said quietly, but I know I can try. And sometimes when everything else has failed, trying is enough. He turned back to the tactical displays and began downloading the station schematics to a portable device. His movements were methodical and unhurried, as if he were preparing for a routine training exercise rather than a mission that every tactical analysis indicated would end in his death. Captain Vasquez watched him with growing understanding. She had served with Marcus for 2 years, but she was beginning to realize that all the stories he had told about human heroes weren't just historical accounts. They were personal philosophy, a code of conduct that defined how he approached impossible situations. How long to reach the station? Marcus asked Threxenol. 2 hours and 53 minutes at maximum jump speed. Marcus nodded and continued his preparations. That leaves almost 11 hours of life support when I arrive, plenty of time. The alien commanders watched in fascination and growing unease as the human prepared for what they all knew was a suicide mission. He checked his equipment with casual efficiency, reviewed the station layout one final time, and then stood quietly, waiting for transport authorization. Threxenol looked around the command center, seeking alternatives that everyone knew didn't exist. Finally, his scales shifted to patterns indicating reluctant acceptance of an inevitable outcome. Transport. Authorization granted, he said formally. May the depths carry you safely, Sergeant Chen. As Marcus headed toward the docking bay, the alien commanders remained in the command center, watching the tactical displays and trying to understand what they had just witnessed. They were about to discover that human stories weren't mythology. After all, they were prophecy. The ghosts Marcus carried were about to become guardian angels for 320 innocent people, and the galaxy was about to learn what human determination really meant. The truth. The docking bay of Kepler Research Station echoed with the soft hiss of Marcus Chen's shuttle as it sealed itself to the airlock. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and the air tasted of recycled fear and failing filtration systems. Marcus checked his equipment one final time, knowing that everything he carried had to count in the hours ahead. His communication device crackled to life with transmissions from Nexus Prime. The alien commanders had insisted on maintaining contact throughout the mission, though Marcus suspected they expected to be witnessing his death, rather than coordinating a rescue operation. "Sergeant Chen, this is command," came Threxnall's translated voice. "Station sensors show 87 confirmed hostiles distributed throughout the facility. Life support is now at 28% and declining." Marcus keyed his response while studying the station's entry points. "Understood, command. Beginning infiltration now." The research station had been designed for scientific efficiency rather than security, which worked in his favor. Emergency access ports provided maintenance routes that bypassed the main corridors, and the terrorists had concentrated their defenses on the obvious choke points. They were thinking like soldiers rather than infiltrators. Marcus slipped through a ventilation access that led to the station's lower levels, moving with the careful silence of someone who had learned that survival often depended on not being noticed. The aliens monitoring his progress through station sensors watched in fascination as he navigated the maze-like maintenance areas. "His movement patterns are highly efficient," observed Vexithar from the command center. "No wasted motion, minimal energy expenditure. He moves like a predator conserving strength for the kill." High Commander Zethkari's scales pulsed with reluctant admiration. "Notice how he avoids the direct routes. My people would have breached the main corridors and overwhelmed the defenses through superior strength. This human thinks like water, finding the path of least resistance." The first test came when Marcus encountered a patrol of 3 terrorists checking the lower maintenance areas. They were heavily armed with military-grade weapons and moved with the confidence of people who believed they controlled their environment completely. Marcus watched them from the shadows, calculating angles and timing. The aliens in the command center held their collective breath as they watched the confrontation develop. 3 armed humans against 1, in close quarters, with superior firepower, on the terrorist side. Every tactical analysis suggested the patrol would detect and eliminate the infiltrator within seconds. Instead, Marcus moved like a ghost made solid. The first terrorist went down before he could raise his weapon, taken out by a silent strike that demonstrated precision rather than strength. The second had time to register surprise before Marcus was among them, using their own numbers against them in the confined space. The third terrorist managed to key his radio before Marcus silenced him, but the brief transmission was garbled and incomplete. "Impossible," breathed Admiral Sirana, her fins rippling with astonishment. "His physical capabilities are within normal human parameters, yet his combat effectiveness exceeds theoretical models." Marcus dragged the bodies out of sight and continued deeper into the station. The terrorists' radio chatter indicated they had heard something, but they attributed the garbled transmission to equipment failure rather than enemy infiltration. Their confidence was becoming a liability. The next challenge came at a flooded section where the terrorists had damaged the station's water recycling systems. Contaminated liquid filled a crucial corridor, and the only way around added an hour to his route. Time the hostages didn't have. "Sergeant Chen," came Threxnall's voice over the comm. "Station sensors show severe contamination in the water. Chemical analysis indicates it will cause respiratory distress and possible tissue damage." Marcus studied the flooded corridor, calculating distances and timing. The water was chest-deep and murky, with no visibility below the surface. Swimming through it would expose him to toxins that could incapacitate him before he reached the other side. "Acknowledged, Command," he replied, and then did something that made the alien observers question their understanding of human physiology. He took a deep breath and dove into the contaminated water. The journey through the flooded section should have been impossible for an unenhanced human. The water burned his exposed skin and made his lungs scream for air, but Marcus pushed through it with mechanical determination. When he emerged on the other side, gasping and chemically burned, he paused only long enough to check his equipment before continuing. "Medical analysis indicates he should be experiencing severe respiratory distress and possible organ damage," reported the medical officer monitoring his vital signs. Yet his movement patterns show no significant degradation in capability. Marcus was operating on something beyond normal human parameters. But it wasn't genetic enhancement or technological augmentation. It was the accumulated weight of every story he had ever heard about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when someone else's life depended on it. The terrorists had concentrated their main force in the central research area where the hostages were being held. Marcus spent an hour working his way through their outer defenses, picking off sentries and disabling equipment with surgical precision. Each encounter was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare, demonstrating how determination and experience could overcome superior numbers and firepower. "He fights like my ancestors," Zethkari observed with growing respect. Not seeking glory or demonstrating dominance, but focused entirely on mission completion. The turning point came when Marcus reached a section where the terrorists had trapped 15 hostages in a laboratory that was rapidly losing life support. The guards were preparing to execute the civilians rather than waste resources keeping them alive. Marcus could hear the terrorists arguing about timing through the door. This was the moment the alien commanders had been dreading. 15 innocent lives versus impossible odds with no backup and no time for elaborate planning. Marcus checked his remaining ammunition, noted the positions of the guards through the door's observation window, and made his decision. He moved like all the heroes from his stories rolled into one, entering the laboratory with the focused intensity of someone who refused to let innocent people die on his watch. The firefight that followed redefined the aliens' understanding of human combat capability. Marcus fought with the precision of Audie Murphy, the moral courage of Hugh Thompson, and the relentless determination of every human who had ever refused to give up when lives were at stake. When his rifle ran empty, he used his sidearm. When that failed, he improvised weapons from laboratory equipment. The terrorists had superior numbers and position, but they were fighting someone who carried the ghosts of human heroes and the absolute certainty that these 15 civilians would not die on his watch. The laboratory fell silent, except for the sobbing of grateful hostages and the wheeze of damaged life support systems. Marcus quickly assessed the survivors, finding 12 researchers and 3 support staff who were shaken but unharmed. The eldest, a gray-haired xenobiologist named Dr. Sarah Martinez, looked at him with wonder and disbelief. "You came alone?" she whispered. Marcus helped her to her feet, already planning their route to safety. Someone had to try. Leading the 15 hostages through the maze of corridors required every skill Marcus had learned in decades of military service. He moved them in small groups, using maintenance routes and emergency passages to avoid the main terrorist forces. Each journey was a calculated risk, balancing speed against detection, but somehow he managed to get all 15 civilians to the docking bay alive. "First group evacuated," he reported to Nexus Prime as the hostages boarded his shuttle. "Returning for the others." "Sergeant Chen," Threxnell's voice carried a note of amazement. "You have already exceeded all mission parameters. Consider extraction for medical treatment and tactical reassessment." Marcus was already heading back into the station, his chemical burns visible but his determination undiminished. 305 people still inside, Commander. Mission continues. The alien commanders watched in stunned silence as Marcus disappeared back into the failing research station. They were witnessing something that challenged their fundamental understanding of combat, courage, and the human species. "He should be incapacitated by now," Admiral Sirana observed, her musical voice tight with concern. "Toxin exposure, combat, stress, physical exhaustion. No being can maintain such performance levels indefinitely." "Humans can," said Captain Vasquez quietly from her position in the command center, "when they have to." The second rescue operation proved even more challenging. The terrorists had discovered the missing patrol and realized they were under attack. They consolidated their forces and increased security, making movement through the station exponentially more dangerous. Marcus adapted his tactics accordingly. He became a ghost in the machinery, using the station's failing systems to his advantage. When the lights went out, he moved in darkness that hindered the terrorists more than it did him. When atmospheric pressure dropped, he used the confusion to strike at their defensive positions. The next group of hostages was larger 43 civilians trapped in the main cafeteria. The terrorists had rigged explosives around the area, threatening to detonate them if rescue was attempted. It was exactly the kind of scenario that made conventional rescue operations impossible. Marcus studied the situation through security, cameras, noting the placement of guards, the location of explosives, and the positions of hostages. Any direct assault would trigger the charges and kill everyone in the room. The only solution was to neutralize every terrorist simultaneously, leaving no one alive to trigger the detonation. "This is tactically impossible," Vexthar declared, his mandibles clicking with agitation. 7 guards with overlapping fields of fire, all within reach of detonation controls. No single combatant can engage 7 targets simultaneously. Marcus disappeared from the security cameras for nearly an hour, moving through areas of the station that weren't monitored. When he reappeared, it was through a maintenance hatch directly above the cafeteria, dropping into the middle of the terrorist, positioned like an avenging angel. What followed was the most incredible display of combat skill the alien observers had ever witnessed. Marcus moved through the 7 guards like a precision instrument, striking with calculated efficiency that left no time for anyone to reach the detonation controls. The civilians watched in terrified amazement as their rescuer eliminated every threat in less than 30 seconds. "By the crystal depths," whispered Commander Zethkari. "He fights like legend made flesh." The evacuation of the cafeteria hostages required multiple trips, but Marcus managed to get all 43 civilians to safety before the terrorists could organize a response. His shuttle made its second departure loaded with grateful survivors, while Marcus prepared for his third and most dangerous insertion. The remaining hostages, over 240 people, were being held in the Central Research Complex, where the terrorist leadership had established their command center. This was where Director Kane and his most fanatical followers waited, surrounded by enough firepower to level half the station. Marcus had been operating for nearly 8 hours now, sustained by nothing but determination and the knowledge that innocent people were counting on him. His chemical burns had worsened, his ammunition was running low, and his body was showing signs of extreme fatigue. But his eyes still held that unwavering certainty that had unnerved the alien commanders from the beginning. "Life support now, at 12%, reported Threxnall. "Station-wide failure estimated in 3 hours. Marcus checked his remaining equipment and prepared for the final assault. This time, there would be no stealth, no careful infiltration. The terrorists knew he was coming, and they were ready for him. "Sergeant Chen," came Captain Vasquez's voice over the comm. "We're reading massive energy signatures from the Central Complex. They've got military-grade weapons and enough explosives to destroy that entire section." Marcus paused at the entrance to the Central Complex, looking through reinforced windows at the terrorist command center beyond. Director Kane stood in the middle of 240 terrified hostages, his finger hovering over a detonator that would kill everyone in the room. "I know," Marcus replied quietly, "but those people in there don't have anyone else." The final battle began when Marcus walked directly through the main entrance, his hands empty and his weapons holstered. The terrorists had expected another stealth attack, and his open approach caught them off guard for crucial seconds. "Kane," Marcus called out, his voice carrying clearly across the complex. "It's over. Your people are dead or captured. The station is failing, and you've got nowhere to run." Director Kane was a tall man whose fanatical beliefs had burned away everything human in his eyes. He held the detonator like a religious artifact, surrounded by his most loyal followers who watched Marcus with a mixture of fear and hatred. "One more step and everyone dies," Kane snarled. "I've got enough explosives here to crack this station like an egg." Marcus continued walking forward, his eyes never leaving Kane's face. The terrorists raised their weapons, but something in the human's demeanor made them hesitate. He moved with the calm certainty of someone who had already accepted the consequences of his actions. "You're going to kill them anyway," Marcus said conversationally. "You and I both know that, so the question is whether they die for nothing, or whether they die knowing someone tried to save them." Kane's finger tightened on the detonator. "You can't save them all. Even if you kill me, my people will detonate the charges manually." "Maybe," Marcus agreed, still walking forward, "but I can try. And sometimes when everything else has failed, trying is enough." What happened next became the stuff of legend throughout the Galactic Alliance. Marcus moved like every human hero who had ever faced impossible odds and refused to quit. He fought, with the fury of Viking berserkers, the precision of trained soldiers, and the absolute moral certainty of teachers protecting children. The battle lasted 17 minutes and left the central complex looking like a war zone. When the smoke cleared, Director Kane and his followers were dead, the explosives were disarmed, and 240 civilians were alive and free. Marcus Chen stood among them, swaying on his feet, but still upright, still breathing, still refusing to fall while people needed his help. The evacuation of the final hostages took every available shuttle from Nexus Prime, but all 320 civilians made it off the research station before life support failed completely. Marcus was the last person to leave, checking every room one final time to ensure no one had been left behind. When he finally collapsed in the medical bay of Nexus Prime, the alien commanders gathered around his bed with expressions of awe and newly discovered respect. They had witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about humans and warfare. High Commander Zethkari was the first to speak, his massive frame somehow seeming smaller in the presence of the unconscious human. "We owe you an apology, Sergeant Chen. We thought your stories were myths. We did not understand they were promises." Admiral Sirana's fins rippled with emotions her species had no words for. "How?" she asked quietly. "How did you accomplish what should have been impossible?" Marcus opened his eyes slowly, focusing on the alien faces surrounding him. His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried clearly in the quiet medical bay. "Because someone had to try," he said simply, "and sometimes that's enough." "Battlemaster," Vexthar clicked his mandibles softly, a sound his people used to indicate profound respect. "We have learned something today about the true nature of strength. It is not in our armor, or our weapons, or our natural advantages." "Then what is it?" asked Captain Vasquez, who had maintained vigil at Marcus's bedside. Marcus closed his eyes, but a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "It's in deciding that some things are worth fighting for, no matter what the odds. It's in carrying the ghosts of everyone who came before you and refusing to let them down. It's in being human when being human is the hardest thing in the galaxy." The alien commanders left the medical bay changed beings. They had entered it believing they understood the hierarchy of strength in the galaxy. They left knowing that humans possessed something far more dangerous than superior firepower or natural advantages. They possessed the absolute refusal to accept defeat when innocent lives were at stake. From that day forward, human mythology was treated with the respect it deserved throughout the Galactic Alliance. Not as compensatory fiction told by a weak species, but as historical documentation of what humans were capable of when pushed beyond all rational limits. Marcus Chen recovered from his injuries and returned to duty, but he never spoke about what he had done at Kepler Research Station. He didn't need to. The 320 people he had saved carried that story with them for the rest of their lives, and the alien commanders who had witnessed it ensured that the galaxy would never again underestimate the species that refused to quit. The ghosts he carried had become guardian angels, and the truth about human nature had finally been revealed. In a galaxy full of superior beings, humanity's greatest strength was not what they could do, but what they would do when everything seemed hopeless. Sometimes, when everything else failed, trying was indeed enough. If you liked this story, please like it and leave your feedback in the comments. Subscribe for more stories.